Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. So recently I hit 2,000 subscribers, which is wonderful and very lovely and bizarre and everything, so thank you. And as part of that, I perhaps foolishly sort of offered to do some kind of Q&A where I took questions and answered them. That's how a Q&A works. You understand that general concept. And so here is me responding to them and wondering why I put myself through this. No, most of these are absolutely lovely questions. The slightly weird ones are, as predicted, Kieran and Larry. But let's get going with them. And I've sort of themed them loosely together, with some being more generally about me and what I do and who I am, some around books, as you would expect, and sort of some sort of hypothetical ones from that off, sort of leading off that, and then into some more general or bizarre questions at the end. So let's get started a little bit. I'm going to start off with questions just more generally about me and who I am. It feels now very self-indulgent now that I'm realizing that I'm doing this. Not like making videos for a year and a half where I just share my opinions wasn't narcissistic enough. Now here I am being like, hi, learn more about me. But we have had a few come in. I say we, me and my team of me and my cat have had these come in, so let's get started. So first, a couple of questions about what I do. Rene Pierre, who's wonderful, go and check him out, asked me what I do for work, and there was also a question from Claire Sutton who asked if I work in the book industry. I don't, as it happens, work in the book industry. Kind of want to. Sometimes I'm a little bit scared about whether I'd find it quite difficult if I did work in the book industry to sort of have the separation to then be able to fully enjoy books and still make videos and go to other events and not feel some kind of weird conflict between them. I work for an education charity. I used to be a teacher before that. And so, yeah, moving to an education charity wasn't a particularly big leap in some ways from teaching. But what's quite nice about that is I do get to kind of engage with books in a way that doesn't feel tied to my work, but is also, you know, I have enough money to buy books. I say that, I work in the charity sector, not famously known for paying people massive amounts, but still, nonetheless, I really enjoy what I do. I enjoy working for an education charity. I enjoy sort of a job that's quite aligned with a sort of mission and sort of personal values around educational disadvantage. But I also get to then sort of read other things outside of that and not feel sort of too bound up with that. So yeah, the book industry is one that I do occasionally want to. I do think about maybe moving into and wanting to go into. I don't know what I do. Part of me likes the idea of being an editor. Actually, the big goal, if I could do anything, would be I would love to actually like judge a book prize, and there'll be lots of questions about book prizes, as you'll see. But that's yeah, that's something that I am really passionate about. And there was also a question from Amelia, sort of on a similar note, asking about what sort of any students of mine, what they would sort of think about the channel if they saw it. Luckily, in some ways, luckily, with not being a teacher anymore, my students, hopefully there's enough critical distance where it's not likely to catch up with me in the classroom. But I think if former students of mine saw my booktube channel, they'd probably be like, oh, there's like still talking too much. So yeah, and actually I think the thing that they might find is they might be like, oh, he actually has personality. Because I think when I was in front of a classroom, I think there were definitely some moments where I was a bit like trying to sort of be sterner or trying to just sort of get things moving along, and you don't necessarily always get to bring as much of yourself to work as you want. So yeah, I realised I've spent 3 minutes answering 3 questions that were interconnected. I can't keep at this pace. I'm gonna have to be a little bit snappier. But that's for that first part there. Next up, there were a few questions about reading habits, and particularly people essentially reading me for filth and being like, or staging an intervention. I think it's probably more of the latter, to kind of just be like, stop, chill, Bob. So the first one from Alfred Hussein, asking what is your typical day like and how do you incorporate reading into it. Link to that. Incandenza Book Club asking, can you talk a little bit about your reading habits? I'm curious about when do you read, where, which part of your place, outside, yada yada. And similarly, Janet Janet Hansen saying, how do you read so many books in a week? Do you actually sleep? Link to that, Fraser also asking me, why have you told no one you are the new Power Ranger? What else could account for how busy you are? Surely the only reason. So to take those all together, yeah, I read a fair bit. I think it's safe to say. How that actually looks in the week can be quite different. I'm a big fan of sort of commuter reading. When I commute, I'm really in the zone and I tend to read quite quickly and quite intensely. So often if I have a really long coach journey or train journey or whatever, I will get through books at quite an alarming rate. Lockdown was a really strange thing for that, actually, because I suddenly found myself just sort of being like, but I have this whole evening because I'm at home now, but do I read? And I'm mostly doom scrolling Twitter. How do I do this? And so what my typical day will look like in terms of where I'm really tempted to make it sound like one of those influencer videos of like, I wake up at 4 a.m, I make a kale smoothie, I cry myself to sleep, but then I drink those tears because they're nutritious. I realize without without sounding like one of those. So I tend to get up quite early. Particularly during the summer, I am, despite basically hating direct sunshine and being out in the sun, the smallest sliver of light and I'm awake. So I tend to be up quite early. If I'm working from home, I'll sometimes try and do a bit of reading in the morning. Doesn't really happen. I normally just sort of lie in or just sort of faff about looking at my phone and then being like, oh, it's time to work. So I do quite a lot of reading in the evenings instead if I'm not doing anything else. And particularly there have been bits of lockdown or working from home where I've just had evenings of just sort of really curling up. To take Incandenza Book Club's question, that's often just in this chair right here. Look at how realistic and lifelike this is. Oh, my cat's on it. I've only just realised that. Hello, Cindy. Sorry, she's literally just snuck in and just been sleeping on there all this time. So I will be sat there, not on top of the cat, or I'll be in bed. I remember I think when I was reviewing Young Mungo, that was one of those books where I read it and it was quite dark and cold outside and I was curled up in bed reading it, which I don't normally do too much. And then there's this weird feeling of sort of finishing the book and being really deeply emotional and then being like, I'm just in bed. I mean, I could nap, but also I'm just about to cry. So that's typically where that happens when I'm at home. And it's a bit of a busy space, so I don't have much room, but I read a lot on public transport or sat in cafes, and that also fuels my desire to have cake, so that works out quite nicely. So that's that. And then in terms of actually how I squeeze in so many a week, I think audiobooks at least count for 1 or 2 per week generally, especially if they're quite short ones, and that will be a lot when I'm walking. I do quite a lot of like walking either to the office or whatever, and do that, and that's quite fun and nice, and I sort of have a kind of in-depth sort of ability to lose myself in that book for an hour or so. But yeah, otherwise I think it is just sort of little bits of time that I sort of sneak here and there, and I always travel with a book pretty much, and it almost now unsettles me. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, that if I travel without a bag, it's quite weird for me. And so I need that bag with me, not only to have all the other stuff, but to have a book. And I do that typical thing of, if I'm very over eager with my assumptions for how much I'm going to be able to read. So if I know that I've got 2 train journeys that are at about an hour each in a day, and I look at a book, I'm like, oh, but I've only got 100 pages left of this book. I'm like, but what if I get stuck somewhere and I need more reading material? This isn't possible. It's like I need to either have my Kindle with me as well, or a second book. Or what if I'm not feeling fiction? I might want to bring some non-fiction with me. So I tangle myself in knots quite a lot, as you can probably tell, and that's pretty much how I do it. But yeah, reading either from here or on a train, and just reading quite a lot. I'm not a Power Ranger as far as I'm aware. I do quite like pasta, and I believe that from if I've been taught anything from my childhood TV viewing habits, the Power Rangers ate quite a lot of like pasta and meatballs, I seem to remember. Or was it lasagna? Maybe it was lasagna. Because they're meant to be like, ooh, they're Italian. And so in the kind of weird coded TV way, they're like, ooh, pasta and lasagna and stuff. So yeah, that's the only way in which I am actually like a Power Ranger. Fraser also asks a follow-up question about, have you had a Bruce yet? This is this is a weird in-joke, but essentially comes from the fact that there is a bakery, I believe in Leeds in the UK, that has this giant bloody cake that they call, not a bloody cake, it's not full of blood, a giant cake, or some kind of pastry thing that they call the Bruce, but the whole thing being around like, can you eat, like kind of an eating challenge associated with it. And so if Fraser ever comes to the UK, we are getting a train to Leeds, despite how long that will take, and we are sitting and we are getting a Bruce, and it's going to be the best day of our lives. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. Next, there was some really interesting and insightful questions around reading itself and reading habits, reading thoughts, all that kind of, not reading thoughts again. I'm really correcting myself a lot today. Anyway, Animo Shoshin asks the question, do you think where you live affects your reading? Which is such an interesting question. I think almost feels like it needs a separate video, but I need to be quick on this one. So this is a really interesting one because I think growing up in London, so many books feature London anyway. So many British books feature London. So many books from outside of the UK have characters going to London or referencing London. And so I feel very lucky that the streets I call home, again, I don't live on the streets, are ones where I can kind of do it. And actually, on a sort of subtle note, I recently read There Are More Things by Yara Rodriguez Fowler, and the really surreal thing for me is a lot of the neighborhoods in this book are around the corner from me. Like, she references a few places that are really close to where I live and that don't normally get referenced in books, and it was a bit eerie. So I think it shapes where I live. It shapes my reading, not only in the sense of how I approach certain books, but also that many books are sort of catered to me or with a London readership in mind, or people familiar with London. But also I think growing up in a big city has also meant that I have access to so many books. Like, London is huge for book publishing. So many people move to London to be part of publishing. And so loads of book events are here, which means that now I get to go and explore them. And there was a really interesting video a bit ago by Books on My Social Life, where he was talking about how often there's a real sort of Euro and America centrism with BookTube and with other book reviewing things. And actually, when a book prize comes out, in some areas you can't get all of those books straight away. And so the only reason I can be such an addict to book prizes is because I can get them. My local London, my library is connected to all the other libraries in London. So if my library doesn't have it, I can request it from somewhere else in London. And I've been incredibly fortunate for my Booker Prize shortlist challenge that I've been able to do that. Pretty much everything I've been able to just get from the library, which is wild. So it shapes it in the sense of availability. I think it shapes it a bit in the sense of where I'm sort of books being somewhat catered to me, but also just that I've been able to really run with any kind of sort of curiosity or passion that I've had, because I've been able to just sort of pick up whatever I want and find something else and go to a giant bookshop and do these other things. And I feel very, very lucky in that sense. Hope that actually answers the question. I feel like I've gone off on what I think the question is. This will be fun when it all comes out in the wash and everyone watches it and like, Bob, that's not what I was saying. So there we go. Next, a few more around books I've enjoyed or read or not enjoyed, as some of them are. So Michael Clark asks, what was my favourite book as a young child, as a teenager and as a college student? So as a child, I read a lot of Famous Five books, which feels like such a sort of middle class kid answer. But a friend of mine just at one point just like had loads of them and didn't want to read them for some reason and just like gave them to me, and we didn't really have any other books. We never really bought them much as a family. We were very much like a library kind of family. I don't know why. Solidarity with libraries, they're great. But so probably the Famous Five books. And then as a teenager, I think I started moving a little bit into, I read a lot of Lee Child for a while and got really into those. I haven't really gone back and read the Jack Reacher books, but I really enjoyed them. And then it was quite fun when he was a Booker Prize judge. last year, the year before, just to sort of be like, ah, I know him, I've read your books. And then as a college student, so this is where I suppose it sort of changed, because as a teenager I was sort of moving from like reading quite a lot of Lee Child and quite a lot of early Ian McEwan, particularly all of his like gruesome stuff. And then as a college student, because I did English Lit as a degree, I didn't really read all that much outside of my degree for a bit, just because I was reading so much in my degree. But that's also where I discovered that I really enjoyed Virginia Woolf, and I read a couple of Virginia Woolf books, and I wrote an essay about Orlando, which just because I loved the way that book worked. It was also around this time, just before then, that I got really into Jan Martel, and particularly his book Self, which is also a lot about gender, and a character who switches gender throughout the book in a very Orlando-like way as well, which in many ways features kind of goes in quite nicely into some of these other questions. But let's get going. Next up, we have Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff, who asks, do you have a favourite crime novel? And it's weird, I basically, when I was preparing for this, I was fully like ready to basically say The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, because in my mind that was a crime novel, and I've sort of just looked it up again, and like, it's a psychological thriller, and I don't think it really counts as a crime novel. So I'm not, I mean, that Talented Mr. Ripley's great. I think it would probably have to be Bathhouse, which is also a thriller, really, more than it is a crime book, but there's a big crime at the heart of it to be solved, I guess. I really don't read that much crime. I should. I feel like one thing I've been realising recently is that I read quite a lot, but I'm not always necessarily reading for my own pleasure. I'm enjoying the books I'm reading, but they're often like literary books that kind of are sort of demanding quite a lot of a very specific way of reading. And actually there is something quite nice about a crime book, of really trying to unpick and work out what's happening at the heart of it. Yeah, I think I have read an Agatha Christie, but I cannot remember which. I do remember enjoying it. I really do want to go back and read those, especially as somebody who just like, I quite enjoy watching those sort of like, you know, like Murder, She Wrote style kind of crime dramas, which are sort of so cozy in their crime, but are fun nonetheless. So yeah, please, some recommendations for some crime books would be good, because I'm awful at knowing what to do. My local bookshop runs a crime book club, and I've always felt like too much of an intruder to that genre to actually join in. I probably should. Bex, who's a good friend of mine I used to live with, asks, which books do you hate or didn't finish? I think I've only DNF'd like 2 books maybe in my whole life. There are a couple that were basically DNFs by proxy, because I sort of was like, cool, yeah, whatever, let's just get through this thing. But in terms of actually putting down and being like, nah. One of them I actually can't remember what they are now. Huh. I read all the way to the end of F-Boy, and somehow, anyway, so one that sticks in my mind is, and I remember being one of the first books I actively just did not finish with, was, I think it's Malloy, by Samuel Beckett, because he wrote a couple of novels, and I remember reading Malloy and being like, what is this? Like, mama, this is garbage. In fairness, I probably would read it now and enjoy it. I read it when I was like 17 or 18. I just remember being sat in the like foyer bit of the library, of my local library, and being like, right, I'm gonna finish it and then hand it back. And the book is like 100 pages or something, and I was 40 pages in. I'm like, I could just give it back. I don't have to finish this. And I did, and I have no regrets. It was not good. At least maybe, I don't know, it just wasn't really for me. It felt really dense and like, ooh, clever, fun things. And I love Beckett's plays, so I don't know what was different about this for me, but yeah, anyway. And following on from that question, in terms of other books I hated, there have only been a couple that I've given really low scores to. F-Boy being the most recent example. It may be a controversial one, Motherhood by Sheila Heti, I just really didn't get on with. Also, I fully understand I am not the target audience for that book. So the book clearly means a lot to some people and is really targeted at those people, and that's fair. I am not the target audience. The book did not work for me. I'm cool with it. I think that's fine and that's fair. And also, I remember, I actually can't remember the name of it now. I read a collection of poetry, and it was like, it was all fine and well and good and everything, but the poet for some reason decided that rhyme schemes had to be used, and it really just like dragged what were otherwise quite interesting and fun thoughts into just like predictable rhyming couplets, and nah, sorry, it just took so much away from it from me. Anyway, on a lighter note, we've got a couple of questions that are sort of, it basically are going to, the answer to them is basically going to be the same, which is DQAN, I'm actually not sure how I'm going to pronounce this, asking what work, novel, play, series, collection have you spent the most time, effort and enjoyment with? And similarly, Amina asking what stories you read in your childhood that you still think about. I was going to say, in some ways, His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, I've spent the most time with in terms of reading the whole sort of series, reading all the sort of most recent books, getting all those little like tiny extra releases that he had. And I've spent a lot of time and really loved those series. I adore them. I think they're fantastic. The only thing is, I guess I probably only really started reading them when I was 18 or so. So in terms of ones I still think about that I read a lot as a kid, there is The Kryptonite Kid by Joseph Torchia, which I don't think I realised quite how queer it was or homoerotic it was as a kid. So I maybe read it when I was when I was like 13 or 14. And then reread it as an adult and was like, this is why this resonated with me. Now I see. Okay, cool. And it's a really beautiful book. It's about a boy who wants to be like Superman because he's being bullied and he's not sort of particularly loved. And then you sort of realize there's also this sort of like attraction between him and Superman of not only wanting to be like him, but also to be with him. It's a really beautiful book. Yeah. So I think that probably still, I think about that book quite a lot. It's just beautiful. We then have Seika V, who's wonderful, asking, what is the best transgender novel you've read? And I'm, again, I find this a bit tricky because my instinct at first was to say something along the lines of something like Orlando or Self by Jan Martel, which plays quite a lot with gender. But actually, neither of those are written by trans people, at least as far as I know, in terms of both of those authors. But they're definitely sort of themes of it there. It also feels a bit basic, perhaps, to say Detransition Baby, but I did love that book. I thought it was really beautiful. It's funny, I'm sort of racking my brain on this and realizing most of the novels I've read haven't necessarily had trans characters, but I've read a really good amount of non-fiction that is by or about trans people. And in terms of novels, I'd maybe say K. Tempest's The Brick. I always get this title wrong. The Bricks That Built the Houses. I don't think it necessarily features any trans characters itself, at least from memory. But K. Tempest themselves is just a really interesting person, and their perspectives on so many things are fascinating. And I think there is maybe a reading of this book where you can kind of see some of their non-binary identity kind of come into it as well. I think as well, just to follow up with the next question by JTH Books, again, wonderful, new to the platform but has been doing a lot on Instagram for a while, wonderful, go check him out, has asked what's a book you'd recommend to everyone no matter their reading taste? And I do wonder, I mean, His Dark Materials is one of those things where I think it kind of blends such an interesting line of being sort of fantasy and for sort of teenagers, but also is just really deeply heartfelt and profound and literary at the same time, and all these other things. I think Shuggy Bane is also one of those ones that almost everybody I know has read it and really enjoyed it. I mean, a few people who didn't, and that's fair, I totally get that, but I think that's a good leveler of like most people know how to approach a story like this. It's incredibly readable, and I'd maybe say that, and I just loved it anyway, and it's gorgeous. So there we go. The next few questions are a little bit more about my channel and about book prices. Who would have thought? The first is by Shelley Swearingen, who's again wonderful, and she has asked, can you share your Booker origin story? When did you first hear about the prize? How did you get into it? When did you realise you wanted to start a BookTube channel dedicated to the Booker? And similarly, we have Curious who's asked what made you decide to start a BookTube channel as well, and also what kind of work do you do to pay the bills, which sort of covered briefly earlier. And both of these, so I love the idea of this as an origin story, like how I became a villain. And the so essentially the Booker Prize, well, BookTube more generally, had sort of been, I've always been interested in books, as you may be able to tell. And the first two that I really remember reading right from the beginning, watching right from the beginning rather, were Eric Carl Anderson over at Lonesome Reader and What Camel Reads, by the same title. And both of them I just remember watching, and that was a real insight into prizes that I'd sort of been skirting around reading, and I'd sort of read a bit. I'd always known about the Booker. I say always, came out of the womb knowing about the Booker, and I said, Mother, please buy me these books. What am I talking about? I was watching them, and I really loved watching their channels, and I really liked especially how both of them spoke, and for Eric still speak about books in such a loving and passionate way, but in a way that's so engaged and so thoughtful, but also isn't necessarily about having to be like, I think my fear had been that YouTube would be this sort of big high-end production, and as much as I definitely do need to up the production on this, I think I was really worried it'd have to be this whole thing, and like lights all around the room and all these other things. So that was sort of quite nice. And I think particularly the Booker bit, I remember being quite aware of it, particularly because Life of Pi is a book that I fell in love with. And then sort of subtly through that was like, oh, okay, that won the Booker, let's learn a bit more about the Booker. And that was the start of everything. From there, it was also a bit of lots of the books. I remember going to a book club sort of in my local library again. Libraries really for the win here. And a few of the books we read were from the 2004 or 5 shortlist, which I loved. It introduced me to Ali Smith. It introduced me to Zadie Smith. And yeah, just really loved it. And I think from there sort of gained a bit of an appetite for it, from which I've never recovered. And so I think that's sort of, and then in terms of my own channel, lockdown here, I was sort of thinking about, I'd been sort of watching BookTube for a bit, and I was like, I could maybe give it a go. And I basically made one video, which was to sort of try and tie me some accountability to my reading project to read all the Booker shortlists. And then I made that video and just put it out and was like, nobody needs to watch it, which is why my picture is still my cat. Like the picture for my sort of channel is still my cat, because I was sort of like, well, nobody needs to see my face, and if it all goes wrong and I want to drop out of this, I don't feel quite as bad if it's got my cat's face on it. Not to put Cindy through the ringer, but you know. And so yeah, that's sort of how it all came to be, really, I guess, which is quite fun. And what have I done? Why am I still doing this? But yeah, it was sort of I think from that it was sort of a way of holding me accountable, and then I just sort of really enjoyed doing it, and here we are, a year and a half later. Oh dear. And we start going into book prizes from here. Kieran Reader asks, if you had to pick only one, what would you pick? International Booker or Booker? And this is hard because the regular non-international Booker has been a source of so many brilliant books that I've sort of come across and loved, and I've only known about through the prize. It's introduced me to Beryl Bainbridge and Iris Murdoch. It's really transformed a lot of my other reading, and I think I'd probably have to say the Booker, but I will add to that the International Booker has introduced me to some like wild books that I would never have heard of. I think it's really changed a lot around publishing, which I think is really exciting. Tomb of Sand being an excellent example of a book that just got so much more love after winning the prize, and deservedly so. I don't think it would have been in quite as many people's hands without that prize. And so this is the thing, although I realise it is a bit of a thing where I sort of joke about following loads of prizes, this is why I love them. They introduced me to books I'd never really heard of before, and I get to sort of play around with it and kind of engage with books in quite a fun way. So I'd probably still lean towards the Booker, but that really hurts me, because I think if the International Booker had been going for 50 years like the main Booker, then I maybe would have a different thought on this, but as it currently stands, but the International Book is great, and it's, yeah, go Tomb of Sand. On a similar note, Roz at Scally Dandling about the books, who again, wonderful, please do check out, has asked, how has your reading changed over the last few years, especially since starting your channel, and how do you think it may develop looking ahead? So, first thing that's changed a lot is more prizes that I've been following, which is dangerous, but has also been wonderful, so I can't knock that too much. I also think the one thing that has changed quite considerably is maybe how I approach certain books, because there are some books that maybe I'd have given up on, but I feel like I need to read to the end because I know that I'm going to have to talk about it. I don't have to, I could choose not to, I guess, but there's that. There's sometimes been that it's really made me organize my reading in terms of a schedule sometimes, particularly during certain times, which is weird because like normally leading up to say the women's prize announcement, I probably in the past would have sort of said like, oh, I'll read that eventually, or like maybe I'll read it leading up to the prize. Now I think I'm a little bit more aware of, I want to read all of these before the winner announcement, because not only do I want to know a little bit more about what's happening, I also want to be able to schedule videos. I need to think that through. Sometimes it's meant these weird situations where normally I would read a book and just give it back to the library, but I think actually I'm going to hold on to this for a couple more days because I'll be filming a video then, and it'd be nice just to be able to show the book, and then that changes some of the other stuff around my scheduling. So I don't help myself a lot with this, it has to be said, and I probably overthink it, but yeah, that's kind of how it's changed it mostly. That makes it sound like it's all been negative. Mostly this has been great. It's introduced me to so many new books. I think it's really changed how I approach certain books. And I think it's also helped me realise a little bit of who I am as a reader, what books I actually am naturally drawn to. I think I'm fairly good at picking things that I think I'll like. It also helps that I like most things. I'm not particularly discerning, but I think that can be quite, that sort of a thing. I think it's helped me by talking a lot about books and subjecting you to my voice, has introduced me, see, even I'm bored of my own voice, has introduced me to more thoughts on how I approach books. We get on to more questions about prizes. Draw Your Book asks, what is your all-time favourite prize, and which year of that prize was your favourite? The Booker feels like a natural one here, and I will say favourite year, 2005 currently, where that was the Ali Smith, Zadie Smith one that I spoke about earlier. Just chock full, and Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, which is incredible. So many other books that I really, really loved from that. But I think sort of recent favourites, this year I've just finished reading the Orwell Prize shortlist, and almost every book on that I have really enjoyed in some way. I think of the 9 books on that shortlist, 5 of them have been 5-star reads for me, I think. The other 4 have been 4 stars that were almost 5. So that probably as well. So this is a good one. And I will say that, you know, sometimes like the International Prize, Booker Prize this year, so many great books, maybe, you know, a bit of a mixed bag for me personally, but so many good books on that list as well. So probably that. The Booker is sort of my, you know, tried and tested, but the Booker has its moments where you're like, did most of these need to be nominated? No. As seen with my recent 1971 video where I read them and I was like, okay, some of them were there, some of them I loved. So there we go. On the book prizes front, Sonia Johnson has asked, what do your friends and family think of your book reading, and are you surprised they have not made an intervention over your addiction to reading prize long lists? Which is hilarious. I love weirdly, right, so most of my friends and family do that thing of just like, oh, you know, we can get Bob some books for Christmas, but it's not kind of as established as like Bob's thing in the family, quite in the same way. Like they know I like books. My parents especially have seen loads of books arrive and been like, there we go, there's another one. But I don't think it's kind of, yeah, even sort of friends who know I have this channel don't necessarily, it's really weird. It's funny how we sort of engage in conversations around it, because it's largely like, oh, that's nice, how's that thing going, is it all right, you're doing all right, let's go back to talking about something else. But it's kind of fun because I think the intervention aspect of this probably more comes from people in the comments, probably quite rightly, being like, Bob, it's okay to not read everything, like you don't need to read every prize. I'm like, but I wanna. And that's sort of how it's been, but I think it's normally it's sort of a combination of sort of Eric being like, do you need to read it, Bob, and same for Larry. Larry has opinions, both basically being like, I mean, you could enjoy your life. You could not subject yourself to all this. You don't have to read it. A bit of that, and also just sort of friends of mine being like, okay, so I don't, I don't feel like we're at the stage where we need to cut your supply, but you don't need to buy more books. Like, it's fine. So there we go. That's roughly how it's been. But yeah, yeah, it's all good. I can change at any time, I swear. No, I mean, like I said, I've been really enjoying reading book prizes, and yes, I've taken on quite a few, and yes, that's at times meant that I'm sort of prioritizing certain books in a way that's felt quite weird, but it all comes together somehow, sort of, maybe. And next, I mean, I will come back to book prizes again because I'm me. But there's another question here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Again, please do check out. And it is, if you were to have another channel, but it couldn't be about books, what would it be about? My answer to this will come up in another bit as well. Part of me thinks maybe I'll talk about Drag Race, but I also don't know. I mean, it's a crowded market full of people talking about Drag Race. I feel like my opinions are, again, mostly I like things and yay Jinx. So I don't know if it would be the most insightful channel. You know, it's... maybe that. I mean, the thing is, I was going to say something because a friend of mine and I are talking about doing like a joint thing of maybe like a podcast because because I'm a man in his 30s. Evidently, that's what we do. At some point, we're like, podcast? Yeah. But my friend and I are talking about potentially doing like a little podcast, partly because she does a lot of work around literacy for young people, and I talk a lot about books and like the sound of my own voice. So together, our united forces, we might be doing that. But that's obviously book related. But yeah, probably Drag Race. Maybe something else as well. Maybe like a travel vlog, despite the fact that I've barely left London recently. Bookworm Adventure Girl also asks, which literary character do you identify with most? Part of me, I kind of want, weirdly, the first one that comes to mind in some ways is Piranesi. But that's not a great comparison. I think more just from his general sense of confusion in that book. Yeah. I would probably also say, I always want to think that I'm Lyra from his Dark Materials, but I'm definitely not as plucky or as brave as her. I feel like I'm one of those side characters who's just like, "You've got this, Lyra," and that's someone I identify with quite. I'm a cheerleader. I'm the sort of the white or blue mage of the group. I'm not. I'm not the main character. Definitely not. So yeah, probably that. And Bookworm Adventure Girl also asks, most importantly, what's your favourite pizza topping? And this will also come up to Kieran's question later. And oh yes, we're coming to the section that's just going to be called Kieran. My favourite pizza topping, being a vegan, is probably quite boring, but just like a good little margarita but vegan for me, that would be lovely. I do just like quite a lot of like veg on top. Maybe that's a boring answer, Bob. Crikey. I think I did want to have this pizza that had like aubergine on it, and it was just sort of so glorious, and I can't remember where I got it, and I really want to find that place again because I think I've dreamt it, but if I haven't dreamt it, that place exists in the world. And I think I remember that place also having an incredible sandwich, but I don't know where it was. I think it was in Toronto. Maybe it was in London. Those are different places. There we go. The wonderful Alex at What Page Are You On also asks, if you could have one author write your life, who would you choose and why? And part of me, obviously the temptation is to say Beryl Bainbridge, and that would be wonderful. Same for Iris Murdoch. Both of them, I think, would capture a level of absurdity and fun that I would hope exists in my life. I mean, given the answer to the pizza question, evidently not. I'm boring. But like, I think I like to, because I think Muriel Spark would be incredible, but I feel like that's maybe too much snarkiness. And I don't know if her writing my life story being like, and then Bob did this, Kel Surprise, would be what anybody wants for a life story. So I think maybe Beryl Bainbridge, because I think like bring the absurdity and silliness and fun and snark, but also like some pathos. So it's not all bleak. Yeah, I think that. There we go. This is now where we merge book prize and RuPaul's Drag Race references. So Charlie Brooke has asked, if you could be a Booker judge or a Drag Race judge, which would you pick? And this is really tough for many reasons. The Booker obviously being something I adore. This is a kind of Sophie's Choice thing here. And part of me is trying to take this pragmatically and practically and be like, okay, look, Booker Prize judge has to read 130 or so books in about 6 months, and there's a lot of pressure riding on this to like deliver and be like, oh no, here are the ones I've chosen. I also feel like that actually works to my skill set, potentially. Drag Race judge, I get to just have a good time and just watch things happen, and it's one day, maybe two, and I'm done. I get to watch a lip sync, but also my skill set, who am I to judge their fashion? If I'm watching something like Snatch Game, I'll just be like, you're all great and I love you all. Or I'll just be like, why are you not Jinx? You could have been Jinx and you're not. So that, so I kind of think like the better choice for everybody would hopefully be me being a Booker Prize judge, because that's kind of a dream. A Drag Race judge would be way more fun. So I'm gonna go for Booker Prize judge because I'm a glutton for punishment, and that feels like the sole reason. In a similar way, around around Drag Race, Eric Carl Anderson has said, holding up a picture of young Bob in a very Drag Race style thing, and if I can find one, there will be a picture of me here, saying, if you could recommend a book to young Bob, which book would you give him? And this is such a lovely question. I actually think I'm actually going to take, despite having been jokey about this, I think I probably would give younger me the book Straight Jacket by Matthew Todd, which is about gay shame, and introduce young Bob to being like, hey, all's good, no need to feel any shame, Bob, you're good, enjoy, take it away. And I think that would have been quite a lovely little gift. Failing that, Beryl Bainbridge, who should be the answer really to most of these questions, apart from the pizza topping, because you don't want Beryl Bainbridge as a pizza topping. That's a bit weird. But for every other question, I think she is a suitable answer, and I'll take that. To follow up with the rest of Eric Carl Anderson's questions, if you could have been a judge during any year of the Booker Prize, which would you choose? I would probably say 2019, partly to stop them giving it to the Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Not a bad book necessarily, just a bit predictable in my opinion, and a bit light on content in some ways. Like, I think I saw things coming a mile off. I was like, this is perfectly well and good and nice, but yeah. And I think I then would have convinced everybody to do a double win, with the other winner being Ducks Newburyport. And I stand by that decision. Gull Woman Other definitely still should have won. That is clearly still the right winner from that year. I just think The Testaments was a weird choice to kind of say we're going to have two winners and then have The Testaments as one of them from that six, right in front of My Salad. You know, come on now. I think then we're kind of, Eric in some ways has sort of predated another question that's about to come up, but if there were a Kate Bush Prize for fiction, which book would be worthy of this award? And I love this. I'm going to imagine that the Kate Bush Book Prize would be a book that sort of is quite artistic and lyrical and fun, maybe has a sort of a slight snarkiness to it, a slight kind of like sense of humor hidden behind the under the surface, but is really at its heart just about sort of beauty and creativity. And I feel like a good book for this, what would be a really fun, kind of beautiful lyrical book for this? I think potentially something along the lines of, I mean, I'm saying this because I can see it in my eyesight, but A Passage North? Maybe that doesn't actually feel right. I think maybe it would be, the Kate Bush Prize I think would maybe reward a book maybe a bit like The Gathering by Anne Enright, or Dinner Party, a Tragedy by Sarah Gilmartin. And the final question from Eric. The library is open. Read your most hated books for filth. And this, I mean, I've kind of mentioned a couple that I really didn't get on with. F-Boy, as previously mentioned, is just so try-hard for me. I just found it so unconvincing. I found that it just constantly traded in generalities whilst trying to sound deep. It just kept going and didn't need to. I kind of just gave up on it a bit, really. It made me so angry because it was such a wasted opportunity, I think, of a book to not play around with some of those ideas more. And yeah, just not good, really. There we go, that's it. There are also a few questions from Beating Around the Books, as you know, over there, who have met in person a couple of times and who is wonderful. So also do check her out generally. And there's a video of us two talking if you need more of me. Nobody needs that. There are several here, and they all kind of, a few of them have are kind of will be touched on as well by a couple of other questions. So I'm also going to look at a question here from Low Shelf Esteem, which will then set up Zena's one. So if you ran your own book prize, what would the eligibility criteria be? What would it be called? And who would win it this year? Linked to that, Beating Around the Books has asked, you have been given the opportunity to set up your own book prize. What kind of books or authors would you like to focus on? Are there any specific eligibility criteria that are important to you? How would the judges be selected, and would they change regularly? And what distinguishes your bookerer, so here we have a name, from the myriad other prizes you follow? So this is actually quite difficult, because for me this year the Goldsmiths prize has just knocked it out of the park and been like, there, that's what I like. These 9 books. Just these, just read them. So really that, but if I was setting up my own, I would probably say that it would probably involve literary fiction in some way. I would want there to be some element where at least smaller presses are given a good shout, just because they publish some of the most daring and inventive work out there. I would also probably like there to be a fairly queer element to it. I mean, it doesn't have to be, so many of my favourite books aren't, but also it might just be nice. Part of me was really tempted to have this as sort of basically being the messy queer prize, which is just sort of lots of books with messy LGBTQ characters, because I love that. But actually that doesn't really get it enough, and maybe that would be a limited pool of books to check out. So I would probably say some kind of literary prize, so not far off the booker, but one that probes a sort of specific kind of thing. So kind of like the Orwell, really, again, but literary books that really sort of challenge us to think about the world differently. And that is vague, I realise, but that could be quite fun. And I would also just quite like to see sort of how we might be able to have a prize where non-fiction and fiction can sit side by side, kind of like the Polari Prize does. So probably some kind of combination of all of those, but basically just what the Orwell Prize is doing, but maybe just a little bit gayer. I think the Booker, but gayer as well. I think that's basically it. There we go. That's my manifesto for change. But I think, and in terms of Zena's other questions, the judges for this would be quite interesting, because my temptation is to say people who already know from BookTube. I feel like KIERAN would be a weird person to have as on the judge panel with me, because we disagree fundamentally on so many books that I love. So we'd have to have some kind of golden button system for me. I would want to be the Simon Cowell of this, but just nice, where I get to veto. And I'm basically like, you are all going to help inform my decision, but ultimately I'm deciding. So please do that. So yeah, I think I'd like to kind of go down that angle. And in terms of who would win it this year, mostly as well just to wind up KIERAN, which is going to be a consistent theme for the next few questions. I would also say There Are More Things by Yara Rodriguez Fowler, just because it's so interesting and clever and poignant and funny and experimental. Even if it's not necessarily my favourite book of the year so far, I still think it's great and would really like to see that. I just think it's neat. And I think Low Shelf Esteem's other question as well, sort of asking about who would win this year. I mean, apart from this, I think it could be interesting. I mean, Young Mungo is probably going to be up there so far as one of my favourites from the year. There are so many books I've really enjoyed this year. Our Wives Under the Sea, I really, really enjoyed too. So yeah, things like that maybe. Who knows? And I should mention, Leo Bancroft also asked the same question, but also basically said about who could submit. And I might also just add to that would probably really focus on smaller indie presses, just because, again, they do some really cool stuff. But also it is very tempting to just have the Iris Murdoch Prize, where every year the book most like the sea wins. That would also be quite fun. And finally, I think of the sort of slightly more serious questions. We have Jacqueline, who has asked, who would I like to collaborate with, and who would I like to meet if distance was no problem, particularly on BookTube. So I've already had the fortune to sort of do buddy reads with quite a few people, which has been a fun sort of form of collaboration. I've done a couple of videos with Sean the Book Maniac. I've done one with Zena over at Beating Around the Books. I've mostly just left abusive comments under Larry's ones, which I think counts as the same thing. I've appeared in a few of Kieran's. So probably, I mean, that's also been quite nice. I'd quite like to judge some kind of book prize with Eric, just generally anyway. I think it'll be good fun. Especially if distance were no problem, it would be quite fun, particularly for people who are a bit further away. So Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, who just genuinely are brilliant. Like, and Nell's now got her own channel as well, which I'll sort of loop in as well. But it would be so cool to be able to go and meet them, just because I think they're great people and it would be really fun. So that, and similarly René Pierre I think is also in the area, which would be fun as well. So yeah, I will say that. But also so many great US based folk. I'd love to go and see Fraser, even if, I mean, ideally obviously bringing Fraser to the UK to go and buy that ridiculous cake. But that aside, yes, I would say there. And speaking of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, we enter the slightly less serious side of things. So, Kiss, Marry, Kill, Julian Barnes, Ian McEwan, Salman Rushdie. I feel like there is no real good way of answering this, is there? I think almost, I'm not in that order. No, so yeah, marry Julian Barnes, because I feel like he'd be really fun and interesting and exciting. And I think just generally a good person to just share a life with. I think he'd be quite fun. Kiss, I kind of want to say Kiss Ian McEwan, but given the sex in most of his books and how like disturbing a lot of it is, do you want to go down that line, that kind of ground with him? Maybe not. Also Salman Rushdie, maybe Kiss Ian McEwan, kill Salman Rushdie. This is hard, man. Like, this is, yeah, same question. And now this is where this really ramps up. Kiss, Marry, Kill, Iris Murdoch, Beryl Bainbridge, Muriel Spark. How do you do this? Weirdly, I'm going to go with kill Muriel Spark first, because I actually think, based on how many characters die in her books, and particularly in a book like Driver's Seat, where there's a real sort of death drive, weirdly, I think that might be Muriel Spark's thing. So that, I feel like Iris Murdoch would be a wonderful life partner and just such a brilliant, wonderful person. So her for that, for Marry, and then kiss Beryl Bainbridge, because I just feel like she's fun there. And then this is where things get complicated even further, and thank you for causing awkward ructions in my friendships. So, Kate Bush, Trixie Mattel, Larry Has Opinions, for Kiss, Marry, Kill. So, how do you answer this? So obviously not kill for Larry, because you can't do that to him. But then could you kill any of the other ones? Maybe kill Trixie Mattel, just because the idea of killing Kate Bush is so not happening. And Larry too, I guess. But, you know, so maybe kill Trixie Mattel. If I married Kate Bush, would I spend my whole marriage just sort of being like, but I love you so much and you're so brilliant? And she'd be like, who are you? Stop following me around. So maybe... marry Kate Bush, kiss Larry Has Opinions. I don't know. What is a good way of answering this without it being awkward? That's a better multiple choice question. Oh gosh. They also ask a much easier question. What is your favourite food and cocktail? And part of the reason why I'm glad that I've not killed Larry in this example is because there's a place that Larry and I have been to several times to get espresso martinis, which is wonderful. And so that would be the favourite cocktail, or anything fruity really. And favourite food, just anything vaguely carb related, mostly pasta. That's a good life. Speaking of Larry, he says, ridiculous question, moi, I'm offended. My question, have you ever attempted to swallow toothpaste? Weirdly, I do actually have a sort of story to this. I was expecting to just be like, oh, Larry. And actually, I remember at one point having, this is to put a heavy caveat and sort of advice thing, at the disclaimer at the beginning of this. Please seek a doctor, do not follow a doctor's advice. Please do not follow what I'm saying here. I think somebody at one point told me that because I think I was like having acid reflux or something, that I should swallow toothpaste. I don't think I swallowed a great amount. I think it was very much like, oh, I've brushed my teeth and I've not spat it out. Oh no, let's see what happens. And it wasn't a particularly exciting story, so that's not the best answer to this. But also just to say that I've essentially tried it. It didn't work. Kill surprise, because that's not really the proper approach. But yeah, there we go. Game on, Larry. And we also have Ben over at Doom Antidote, who, I mean, these are wonderful. So, first question, drag race entrance or exit line? Now, I've thought about this. I mean, partly it would depend on what my drag queen character would be called, but I've thought about this. So, I really liked that in Aquaria in season 10, at one point said, while other girls were reading books, I was turning looks. And I just thought it was so ridiculous a phrase. I think I'd invert it. I think I'd be like, while other girls were turning looks, I was reading books. And just do that. And then my exit line would be me going like, hate to end on a cliffhanger, and then like walk off. It's a bit, that's rubbish. It's not the best that I could probably do, but I like the idea of keeping it book themed. Either that or doing kind of Jimbo and just doing like a really extensive cry as I leave. I think that's my kind of jam. There we go. His next question, your best apology video thumbnail pose. And I do love this genre of booktube video, of YouTube video, of sort of quite big, high-profile people. If I ever now have to do an apology video, crikey, okay. But, you know, I love that they're always, like, really serious, but trying to be like, I'm sad, but I'm also a bit sexy. And so they're always a bit sort of like, or, I mean, which is not particularly sexy at all, because it's my face, but imagine somebody else doing that. I love that there's always a sort of, I've still got to be glamorous, but also, you know, like, no, mate, like, if you really felt it, I'm sorry, you wouldn't, like, put on a full face of makeup to do this, but then you also wouldn't make this whole production about being like, I have no makeup on because I'm sad. You're like, okay, come on, mate, sort your life out. All right. Anyway, number 3, you're Donna Tartt's book editor, and she wants to title her 4th book, Hallelujah, I'm Back, Bitches. How do you broach the subject with her? I wouldn't. I would be like, Donna Tartt, that is the best idea you've ever had. Go with that. I am fully behind you. I think, you know, you're giving the gays everything they want. I believe in you. And I would let her do it. And unfortunately, it might not really work out well for her. But, I mean, she stayed authentically true to herself, and that's fine. And then final question, newest fictional crush. And I don't know if I've had any books recently that I've had massive crushes on many of the characters. I think it was weird recently reading The Arena of the Unwell by Liam Connerman. Not because I fancied any of the characters, but I think it reminded me a lot of like being 18 and having crushes on indie boys who wore skinny jeans, and then like a couple of years later being like, oh no, no Bob, no. What were you thinking? But at the time they were edgy and cool. If not that, probably some of the bikers from Box Hill, just because they were pretty hot. There we go, I said it. And now we approach the section of the video that none of us have been waiting for, and those are the questions from Kieran. Let's take it away. His first question, Plek. Referencing this book. My answer, Plek. It's a completely an in-joke, essentially, because at one point the sound of typing is used in this book as like plek, 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 plek. And somebody posted on his Discord being like, hey, this book's really fun. Kieran then read it and was like, what is this plek nonsense? But I feel like I got my own back because I sent a book to Kieran at one point and just attached the post-it note to the book that just said, Plek. So there we go. The next one. Why is it called Beauty Sleep when I always wake up a hot mess? This is not an agony aunt page, but okay, thank you. I would say that sounds like a you problem. You're welcome. I say this as someone who always wakes up looking like they've just been freshly exhumed. So do with that what you will. Kieran's next question. There are a wide variety of sausage. Get your mind out of the gutter. Sausages, I think, get your mind out of the gutter, for the general populace to consume. Which flavour of sausage do you find utterly delectable? I am a vegan, so not many of the sausages, but I will say at one point there was a very, very good vegan, like chorizo sort of sausage that was made, I think, by like Sainsbury's or something. Not sponsored, but please do send me free packages of them that were just like, yeah, right up there. But otherwise, I find the question personally offensive, Kieran. What are you doing? And last but not least, Kieran has said, can you redo your 2K sub video as a GCSE drama performance that got top marks? I feel like there's a lot of background to this, which is that Kieran and I at one point discovered that we both have a shared love of really wonderfully trashy GCSE drama performances. GCSEs being the exams you do when you're sort of 15 or 16 in the UK. And there's a sort of culture, well, an ongoing joke, I guess, that people all a lot of people seem to understand in the UK, of sort of being that GCSE drama was full of the most ridiculous performances where everybody was trying to like act super sort of whatever. So it's always things like, no, don't do drugs. And like these really elaborate hand gestures for no reason. And then like people sat on chairs pretending to be on a bus. And then like none of it really makes sense. And it's all very like hyper dramatic. So with that in mind, I present to you the world premiere of something that nobody asked for apart from Kieran, which is my 2K sub video done as a GCSE drama performance that got top marks. You are welcome. Why we... I'm in my house. It's lockdown and I am reading. But who do I talk to about it? About it. Booktube. I upload my video. Type. Play. I make the video. People watch. But no, who is doing this? People are watching. 100. 200. I have subscribers? 300, 400, what is this? 1,995, 1,996, 1,997, 98, 99, 2,000. End scene. What the hell was that? I was video chatting Kieran the other day and I tried to give him a brief preview of this, which was this was gonna be a much longer piece where I referenced the millennium and counting down to 2000, the millennium, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't think of how to make this work without just shouting the word firework multiple times at my phone. And that's a bit weird. Not like none of that wasn't. So you're welcome. This has been me. I've been Bod the Bookerer, talking about, well, answering your questions in a lot of detail, far too much detail probably. And now I'm deeply embarrassed that I've put this on the internet. I've been Bob. Thank you again so much for subscribing. It's still a bit bizarre that all of this has been the case. I somehow have subscribers. What on earth is going on here? Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Despite all my rambling, I've been Bob. Take care. Sweet to you soon. Bye bye.